All right. Friends of Washington College and of the literary life around the world, good evening, and welcome to the 2021 Sophie Kerr Prize ceremony. I am Professor Sean Meehan, Chair of the English Department and Director of the Sophie Kerr Endowment here at Washington College. We are gathered on campus tonight, and we are thrilled to be here in person to celebrate and to hear from the Sophie Kerr finalists for 2021. These are 6 writers who have each achieved much in getting to this stage and have great promise for what lies ahead. I'd like to recognize them each: Mackenzie Brady, Nicole Hatfield, Rebecca Kanosky, Justin Nash, Megan Walsh, and Tamiya Williams. Congratulations to you all. A good way to give our attention to this present moment and its promise for the future is to consider where we are and how we got there. I'd like to begin with some acknowledgements. The Sophie Kerr Committee acknowledges this region as the original homelands of the Wacomis, the Choptank, and the Nanticoke tribes. We acknowledge their painful history of genocide and forced removal from this land. We honor the indigenous peoples still connected to this land, and we are committed to making our community a more equitable and inclusive place to gather and learn. 50 years ago, in 1971, James Decette was awarded the Sophie Kerr Prize, its 4th recipient. We are very excited to have him return to Washington College this evening as our keynote speaker. We celebrate his achievements and the thriving legacy of the Sophie Kerr Prize. To introduce Jim in a few moments, I will happily call upon Dr. James Allen Hall, the director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House, a great mentor to the literary arts here at Washington College. I want to recognize my stellar colleagues in the English department who serve on the Sophie Kerr Committee and bring literature and writing to life for our students. They are, in my view, incomparable. Joining with the English faculty, as stipulated by Sophie Kerr's will, we are grateful for the contributions of interim president of the college, Wayne Powell, and for continuing support, our provost, Michael Harvey, and for their expert guidance in organizing the prize and this ceremony tonight. I thank Jennifer Kazmarchik and Gina Ralston. Let me offer some additional words of retrospect about the prize to set the stage for this night of prospects. The Sophie Kerr Prize is well known, perhaps most for its size. It is the largest undergraduate literary prize in the United States, larger, in fact, than the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award combined. This year, once again, it is worth more than $65,000, 65000. For more than 50 years, Washington College and the English department have been truly distinctive in providing programs in literature and writing supported by the Sophie Kerr gift. That's the other half of the prize. Writers and scholars brought to campus every year to talk and work with students on fiction, nonfiction, poetry and publishing, journalism and editing, critical thinking, and creative writing. Walk through the O'Neill Literary House, and you will be amazed, as I am to this day, by the legacies echoing from the walls. Jericho Brown, Henry Louis Gates, Allen Ginsberg, Colin McCann, Toni Morrison, Maggie Nelson, Catherine Ann Porter. On a non-sectarian campus that values liberal education and the power of writing to move the world, that's our chapel. But the Sophie Kerr Prize is more distinctive for how it awards, rather than for how much. By the specific terms of Sophie Kerr's will, the prize is awarded to a senior chosen for, quote, having the best ability and promise for future fulfillment in the field of literary endeavor. In other words, we award the prize for something that hasn't happened yet, but in the eyes of the committee is underway. The finalists, and among them the winner, are here tonight for their promise. Promise that the cultivation of the unforeseen is the most remarkable characteristic of the prize, though it may be least known and understood. Consider how the prize came to be. Sophie Kerr, a writer born in 1880 in Denton, right here on the Eastern Shore, advanced her way into the literary editing and publishing world in New York City, becoming a successful writer of fiction, 23 novels, hundreds of short stories. And here's the part for us to keep in mind, certainly for the finalists, but also for those tonight listening, responsible for guiding them, and more broadly, for guiding the endeavor of this college into its future. Sophie Kerr visited Washington College as a guest, a recipient of an honorary degree in 1942, where she sat alongside First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. She was so taken by the experience that years later, she created the endowment to live on after her death in 1965. I've been thinking much about what that day was like when she was on campus, and the likelihood that nobody that day, maybe not even Sophie herself, knew what was about to happen. And look at what happened. Sophie Kerr didn't merely will money to Washington College, she established a promise for its future as a home for literary education, a place for the cultivation of intellect and imagination. Remember when she did this, 1942 in the midst of a world war, and again in the 1960s, at the beginnings of the Vietnam War and great social unrest. Sophie Kerr recognized that the future belonged to the creative endeavors of students, and she believed that Washington College and its literary programs were the place to guide them toward fulfillment. Sophie's faith, her trust in our education, remains the most valuable part of her endowment. And now on to our main event. To introduce our keynote speaker, please welcome my colleague, Dr. James Hall, director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House. Do you remember James? And then I think I'm supposed to.
Hey, y'all. I said, hey. Hey, all right. Sean's right. So I'm the director of the Literary House, and getting to work there every day is a real honor and sort of daunting when you walk by Toni Morrison's signed broadside and Allen Ginsberg and John Ashbery and Gwendolyn Brooks and what am I doing with my life, right? Except that what I'm doing is getting to work with extraordinary young people like the ones behind me, and many more than this too. This is a vibrant community of incredible writers and editors, and it's so that's the history, the legacy on the Lit House walls, but the people I get to meet inside the Lit House are the joy. And I don't know what I'm going to do without you guys in the Lit House. I hope you'll come back. You can see I'm very verklempt. These kids are awesome. So I will say that, and then I will also say to the family members and loved ones in the audience, thank you for making these kids who they are. You deserve a round of applause as well. I hope that you will give yourself one. As Lear says, nothing comes from nothing. So anyway, that was not my job, but my job is to introduce our keynote speaker. In the fable, we are passengers, writes James Decette in his poem, Our Fables Become Us, who have come to this suffering river to shed our different languages and to become one healing song under a moon bright as water. I love that. In Jim Decette's vision, we are taken away by fable, transported, passengers. And that while the language and the story are a kind of river sweeping us up and along, we also shed our different languages. The poem teaches us that language can be a kind of healing if we allow it to open us to ourselves, to let the story through into what is beyond. Through the explicable lies the mysterious and the unsayable, and the writer is always trying to move through that door. Jim Decette is a writer who believes that language is a conveyor of healing, a way to turn and return to our purest selves. Before coming to Washington College, James Decette attended the prestigious and renowned Choate School in Connecticut. In conversations with me, Jim has told me that writing was very early on a driver for him, but that he didn't know where or when it would take him. And that's the word he used, driver. I thought immediately of car metaphors, poetry as chauffeur, as taxi driver, as a lift without any destination. Well, let's just thank goodness that Jim got in the car. At Choate, he took classes from a professor named Burr Johnson, who was wont to write lines of poetry on the classroom, picture snippets of Emily Dickinson floating in white chalk on a black space, a kind of classroom epigraph. Soon, Mr. Johnson was encouraging high school-aged Jim to send him a poem every week. It became my refuge, Jim told me a few weeks ago when we talked about how his love of poetry began. Flash forward to Washington College, spring 1971, and Jim Decette won the Sophie Kerr Prize. After that, he spent some time in Morocco, as one does. Then came back to Boston and took some poetry classes at Boston University and Suffolk University. Then he attended the University of Oregon's MFA program, and it's there that he started his first press in a barn. I love that too. He began then writing to poets he admired, asking to print their work, and people like W.S. Merwin responded. Jim has always seen poetry and publishing as community-building endeavors. Publishing and printing and writing are acts of loving the world. Jim Decette has been a self-employed writer, a graphic designer, and a limited edition book printer for 40 years. Currently, he's the editor of the Chestertown Spy, the proprietor of Chester River Press, a partner at Mad Parrot Press, and the designer for Harold Grinspoon Foundation in New York City and Tel Aviv. Decette's design for the Chester River publication of Heart of Darkness won the prestigious Carl Herzog Award for Design in 2010, and he's also designed a book of the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Franz Wright's poems, as well as a breathtaking fine letterpress edition of The Wind in the Willows, available for orders now. He's currently ghostwriting a nonfiction book about U.S. violations of the laws and customs of war. That must be a very long project. His collection of poems, Lightning Round, will be available next spring. He lives here in Chestertown, Maryland. We're lucky to have him. Decette addresses this locale in his poem, River. Finally, I come to see you again, he writes, then moves to describe the Chester River. Not smooth as a worn opera glove, not explaining the predicament of time, nor the silver covenant reflecting the faces of lovers. For Decette, the natural world may be elegant, may be timeless, may even be romantic, but it's also more. He calls this river not just the wound where the soul slips its envelope of sorrows, but a dark, wet heaven. Here is a heaven that accepts the souls of cars and wedding rings, of cast-off and misdirected things. It could be said that his poems are the same, a fabulous haven where ideas and emotion find form, where every broken thing finds its way back to wholeness. Please welcome our keynote speaker and the 1971 winner of the Sophie Kerr Prize, James Decette.
Greetings to all of you. Please excuse my voice a little bit. I got hit by a wave of pollen today, and I have allergies. It's an honor to be here with all of you this evening to celebrate these young writers and to realize also that 50 years is half a century. And I'd like to thank Dr. Meehan, Sophie Kerr Committee, President Powell for inviting me, and James Hall for the generous introduction and reading a poem that I've completely forgotten about. I'm especially happy to meet Mackenzie, Nicole, Rebecca, Justin, Megan, Tamiya, who sit before us with astonishing grace. Each of you are here because your talent has been recognized by the committee. That in and of itself is an extraordinary accomplishment and one that will stay with you, I think. 10 members of the English department who you have studied with for 4 years, wrangled with over ideas, been chided by and encouraged by, have read your manuscripts and agree that you are a candidate who may fulfill Sophie Kerr's essential requirement of having demonstrated the best ability and promise for future fulfillment in the field of literary endeavor. Be that as it may, you have made it here. It occurs to me that there are several things we share today by default. A celebration of the craft of writing born out of a liberal arts education, and having spent a year in a sensory deprivation tank in a world engulfed by the pandemic. It truly amazes me how we adjusted to this world, to this pandemic life of isolation, Zoom classes and the rest, and to discover that we're probably only about 3 degrees away of becoming marginally housebroken raccoons. Or maybe that was just me. Don't come over to my house. I like how this important literary award presentation has developed over the years, and especially that all the finalists are honored equally for their achievements. And I look forward to hearing them in a few minutes and the years to come. Back in the olden days, there really was little recognition of the finalists, and I think we all felt awkward and sad about that. We also had no clue how the winner was to be notified, if beforehand or graduation or send up a flare. I think graduation then was about a week after finals. We had what they called blue books in those days when you actually had to write in longhand. One of the English exam questions that I was given was a textual deconstruction and interpretation of a poem by John Milton called On the Late Massacre at Piedmont. I'd never seen it before. My life flashed before my eyes. I was hoping for something a little more contemporary, and after finals, I went back to my dorm room and calculated a miserable future. Summer classes and washing dishes, maybe. Then several days later, I was told to visit the head of the English department. That didn't bode well. I'd never even taken a class from him. I knocked on his door sheepishly. Dr. Newland, with his impeccable Edwardian grace, opened the door with a handshake and a smile, and I thought, oh my God, he's certainly happy to be telling me goodbye. Well, you know what happened. 50 years later, I'm standing here applauding your creativity and honoring your journey to this moment and the one opening for you on the horizon. I think I know how you feel, the ravenous butterflies around in your stomach. These last few weeks since I was invited to be with you, I thought about what I could share, any small thing I might give you to take away. So I thought about the place from where we create, as if it has its own geography, its own psychic terrain, its own harsh weather that rains the kind of doubt that writer John McPhee called the self-inflicted paralysis of a writer's normal life. All the way to the bright, shining moments we recognize that, yes, I've got it right, or as right as I can make it. That's the try again, fail better part of Beckett's sentiment about writing. It sounds negative, but it's not. It's about succeeding in the glare of self-criticism and rejection and trying to find and recognize your voice. The photographer Diane Arbus wrote an epigraph for a collection of her work that still offers me a hint of recognizing when we were on the right track. She wrote, "It's what I've never seen before that I recognize." To me, that is the discovery of voice. You know it's there, you sense its authenticity, you've seen flashes of it, so you remain in a constant search of its evidence. It appears and it's yours, and probably different from the one you thought you were setting out for. Sometimes I think of writing like this. I imagine I have a friend who can't see. I'm walking with him or her and describing the world around us. How at noon the table umbrellas bloom open on 53rd Street, or the expression on a child's face as it's reunited with its family after a long separation. And because he or she has never seen and does not have a stock of similes and metaphors, you must employ every octave of your senses and emotional experiences to convey that moment. Write like that. Listen to that voice along the way. Keep what you need and discard the rest. And importantly, if what you hear is silence, be silent without frustration, even though you beg to hear anything that resembles a good idea. Have faith. You'll be amazed at where it'll take you with a little courage. So you have come this far. It's just another beginning. How will you apply this gift you have? Whether or not you have an extended passion to write, a fierce need for it, remains to be explored. But here's the thing. That place you have developed, this craft with your professors and peers, will go wherever you are. It can become a powerful and clarifying vantage point and serve you no matter what path you choose. Perhaps it will find you in a newsroom or a cabin in the mountains of Colorado, or as an attorney or a teacher or a social worker, but it will find an avenue because it must. This place from where you have learned to write is portable. Finally, a few notes. Don't be too self-critical. Comparison with another is an excruciating death of creativity. It's not a race to be published in the New Yorker. Yeah, William Faulkner wrote, "As I lay dying in 6 weeks." And I've heard that Frank Herbert wrote Dune during his lunch break in the back of a station wagon. Both of them masterpieces. But take your time. Everyone has a different life rhythm. Don't fear rejection. It's just another way of saying, we don't have the right audience for you. And even that your work is completely misunderstood. My current favorite example of that, as James mentioned that we're working on Wind in the Willows, was that Kenneth Grahame was already famous when he wrote Wind in the Willows for writing 2 children's books. And he was kind of coerced into writing Wind in the Willows, and it evolved out of a story, night story that he told his son. He submitted his manuscript and received a letter from a New York editor, and I'm paraphrasing, as, "After the success of your wonderful children's book with actual children in them, you now send me a manuscript about badgers, rats, and toads. I'll pass." At last count, 85 million copies in 27 languages have been sold. And there's Herman Melville's great rejection letter from Peter Bentley. in New York. He wrote, "First, we must ask, does it have to be a whale?" And then suggested a full-bore sexist alternative. Quote, "While this is rather delightful, if somewhat esoteric plot device, we recommend an antagonist with more popular visage. For instance, could not the captain be struggling with the depravity towards young maidens?" I really would like to have heard Melville's response to that letter. Sadly, we still find these kinds of recommendations in the publishing world. Good writers often struggle to find a publishing home, but they have the courage to continue. Lastly, find your literary tribe. I'm sure you have already. By that I mean the authors you love to read, your core family, the ones that call you back throughout your life to teach you once again and to give you joy. And always be open to adopting a few more. Faulkner had an extended family. Asked in Paris, he said, "I read Dickens, Conrad, Cervantes, Flaubert, Balzac, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Shakespeare, Donne, Keats, Shelley. I've read these books so often that I don't always begin at page 1 and read on to the end. I read one scene or about one character, just as you'd meet and talk to a friend for a few minutes." I added my small literary tribe at Washington College in the early days of the creative writing program, enhanced by Professor Robert Day. He's one of the reasons that you have visiting writers as part of the creative writing program. He also founded the notion of having a literary house, a place for student writers to gather. He used to take us on excursions. One memorable weekend was spent at the University of Richmond, and the opportunity to sit down for an afternoon with Anthony Burgess, who told us stories about Dylan Thomas. That's the way you find tribes. I added to my list in the early 80s when I found a printing press in a barn in Oregon. Again, as James mentioned, the timing couldn't have been better. It was the advent of small presses, like Sam Hamill and Tree Swenson's Copper Canyon Press, Gray Wolf Press, North Point, and on. With a love for poetry always on the ledger, I thought I might start designing and printing poetry books, but where do I start? I got nothing to lose. Start at the top. So I wrote W.S. Merwin, David Young at Oberlin, Anselm Hollow, who was just over from Finland, and they all said yes. I said, really? Okay, I have to learn how to print now. And I did. And I began corresponding with some of the finest printers on the West Coast. They themselves were extraordinary writers and designers, and I added them to my tribe. I found that it was never awkward to ask stupid questions if you don't know the answer, and I'm still asking them. I know these 4 years of study, working with your craft, and considering a life as a writer have been daunting, especially this last year spent staring through a computer screen at your classmates and professors and even your family. Writing is already a little like swinging on a trapeze juggling surgical knives with your mom below, distressed and yelling, "What do you think you're doing? Come down from there." And add to that the frustration, isolation, and utter tragedy of the pandemic. Your last year surely has been a challenge, but it can also be your baseline, the place where empathy takes hold as you begin to experience the wider world and sense that with your gift, you might be of service to something greater than yourself. Inform life and shape it. This is your affirmation to go forward, knowing you have this ability to share your voice. Share it well. Write more. Keep sharing wherever you find yourself, whatever other profession you may choose. When the poet Rilke was Rodin's secretary, he stayed at the famous sculptor's house, estate. After long hours of conversation about art, the two would bid each other good night. But rather than say good night, Rodin would say, courage, something that stuck with the young poet the rest of his life. So I say tonight, courage to you all. Thank you. Now, here's the fun part. I'm going to invite the readers up, and we will be starting with Mackenzie Brady. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So tonight I will be reading two poems, the first of which is Boys Who Know You Like Girls, Fuck You Harder. Put their hands around your throat and introduce you to their mother. Squeeze a little too tight, put their arm around your waist, leave you heaving but smile down at you so you know they didn't mean to be so rough. Everything is going to be okay. Stick their fingers in your mouth and tell you to wear the tight red dress, all the places women have, with the two small black heels. Think they can do better and run their fingers through your hair. Do it aggressively, only tug at the knots. Pin down your wrists and rib you about girls. Lean all their weight on you. Say they love you after. Know where you're most sensitive and you believe it when they use it against you. Leave you because they think it's weird, like you knew they would, which doesn't become less true just because it's sad. And this second one has a content warning for sexual harassment and assault and an overdose. So there's that. But what my therapy bill would look like as an old McDonald's receipt. Cashier Mackenzie B., November 2016, 11:35. One order of one phone number on the receipt I just handed out the back window from the boy in the backseat's mother on behalf of her son, $1. One order of two guys who come through the drive-thru twice because the first time I won't give them my number, so the second time they threaten to sit at the window until I do, $10. No, they leave after I tell them I have a boyfriend. 20 orders of one old man tells me I should smile more, $20. One order of one coworker stands too close when he ropes me into a conversation about the best sex position, $4. 16 orders of one polite conversation with the parents of people I am no longer friends with, $16. One order of one coworker gets morning sickness at the beginning of her shift but doesn't know she's pregnant yet, $1. 20 orders of one coworker tells me not only about their current sex life but their entire sexual history, $20. Add, I'm expected to contribute to the conversation. One order of one ambulance picks up a man who passed out on the bathroom floor with his pants around his ankles after he'd overdosed, $15. Add, the only male employee working at the time posts a video narrating finding him. Add, later, the man's mother comes through the drive-thru after she sees her car in the parking lot, and we must explain what happened. 3 orders of one coworker justifies vaginal discharge and the use of vibrators to her other female coworkers, $9. 16 orders of one Sunday morning, an old friend's grandfather buys 6 burritos and 6 medium black coffees for the other people at church, $8. Add 6 mild sauce, add 6 creamers, add a variety of sugar and sweeteners. One order of one guy walks up to the counter, shirtless, thinking if he flirts with me, he'll get his meal for free, $8. No, I had just seen him kiss his girlfriend. 8 orders of one coworker's last day when I am forced to hug them goodbye despite not being friends, $16. 1 order of one visit from my then boyfriend's mother, and she tells me not to tell him that she stopped by, $1. 7 orders of one overheard conversation about the managers being in open relationships with their husbands, $14. Add learning the rules and conditions of their relationships. 5 orders of 1 polite conversation with my ex-boyfriend's stepdad about how I have been in the 2 years since his stepson and I broke up. $5. Combo order. 5 orders of 1 moment of absolute panic as I see my ex-boyfriend's little brother looking at me with the same expression of disgusted sympathy as he did the day he walked in on his brother standing in front of me, dick shoved into my mouth. $200. Emotional upcharge. Subtotal $349. Tax $20.94. Total $369.94. Cash $400. Change none. Now hiring.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Nicole Hatfield.
Hello, I'll be reading for you 2 short poems. The first one is titled, Why Poets Are Always Writing About Bones. It's something about the fragility of bone, swollen white shattering into curved sharps and soft life. It's like dancing naked when you could catch fire by running a fingernail along your collarbone. Something with nourishment and bereavement, burned mouths and salt-licked palms pressed against a world of bones, still sanctified. It's like when the poet goes to the graveyard to hear wind throw itself against stone, or whistles through their teeth to hush the wind and rattle the space between teeth and bone. It's the soul in disguise, isn't it? When the mother builds a home out of dead words and imagines it can raise a baby, holds it between cracked coos and warm flesh greased and tallow, a bone out of body, something haloed and picked clean, something carved out of tenderness. And then this next one is titled, Red Barn with Frozen Ground. The night wind throws the stars across a winter sky, and the earth is hard, and the horses are hungry but beautiful. Their noses are soft. I am comfortable. My fingers like cold carrots as I soak sweet grain in warm water for the gelding kicking at his door. He will die a retired horse. I watch him eat. His old bones have carried so many children. His teeth are weak from years of chewing. He throws his body against the stall door. My shivering turns into sweating and the night into mourning. My ungloved hands reach down his choking throat and feel darkness. His glands swell, like night swallowing a city street. But I am alone and the sedatives in another room. This animal moans, but no sound resonates, because I cry and the birds sing into the space between my lungs. I don't leave his stall until the barn cat crawls over my still body, and her empty stomach echoes into me. Thank you.
Thank you. These are great. The next reader, Rebecca Kanosky.
At the beginning of the pandemic last year, I was feeling unmoored, which I think many of us were. And so to ground and humble myself, I set out to run once a day for 50 days straight. The piece I'll be reading from today, titled Church of the Sunday Long Run, is the written manifestation of that physicality. I wear running shoes to Sunday service when I manage to make it at all, panting in the last pew, pulling my socks up over my ankles to hide the dirt. It's usually just me, trying hard not to hear my own breathing and zoning out over the homily, the gospel, the hymnals. Church of the Long Run sounds beautiful, but the stained glass looks more like polarized lenses, and the temperature is never quite comfortable because the AC is broken. Peeling my thighs from the bench, I cruise on up to communion with legs like cold, rolled steel. But I can't choke the wafer down, so I settle for gulping the wine. That goes down easy. I could leave right now, and no one would know. And maybe if I light a candle on the way out, the whole church would burn down and save me from this Catholic guilt that hits me right behind the left rib. I'm trying to make it here for 50 days straight so I can hover just a little bit higher like the deity I am in my mind. But I've never been one for worship, and even Jesus Christ only made it 40 days in the desert. So for now, I'll take off my own shoes and scrub my feet until the toenails fall off black and bloody. And then I'll be back for another round, another slow burn down the aisle, and another sip of wine. But please, don't expect too much from me. God knows, I never do. Thank you.
And I'd like to hear from Justin Thomas Nash.
Tonight I'll be reading 3 short poems, the first of which I do want to give a quick content warning for as it makes use of the F slur. Self-portrait without myself. The fog still clears on the morning into which I would have been born. A child still drops a razor and shucks the skin from their left hand. Someone's brother is still the first person to call them a faggot. And someone still gets called a faggot by the girls recording their videos on the train. Someone will still throw a punch at someone who loves them, and this poem would go on longer if written by someone unafraid of its implied conclusion. But I cannot erase myself from this. I cannot let my parents live, thinking nothing of the changes in the weather. Braided diptych with everyone's white guilt. In town, a man's bike is stolen. My grandparents live in a house as old as our country. My mother buys him a new one, the nicest bike she can find. The house has 2 kitchens. The man's father worked for decades as my grandfather's farmhand. There are only 9 rooms, but there are 3 staircases. If they ever knew it, no one in my family remembers his name. There is the grand one and 2 more with doors that hide flush against the walls. When my mother has the bike delivered, she has it delivered anonymously. When my cousins ask about the staircases, my grandmother says, "We never enslaved anyone." My mother will tell me everything she knows about the man and never mention the bike. My cousins have just learned the answer to their question, so I tell them to ask it again. Palinode. If you ask me, wouldn't it have been easier to be a child anywhere else, fewer fields or more than animals to confide in? I won't tell you. That I have not yet been asked by a man to lasso his leathered hands or to spit, slack-jawed, into his supplicant mouth does not mean I could not hit my marks every time. I grew up learning the safest ways to stand, how to speak, to always straighten my wrists. Now, what would it cost a boy to look at another boy, and who earns the payout? These are the questions worth answering, what to do with a rope and your own saliva. I went to the city to find myself and did nothing but show it where I'd been. They were dull, or so was I, to think it could not happen here. clear sky, and each of us always improving our aim. Thank you.
Now, we'll hear from Megan Walsh.
Hello, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to be reading 2 short poems for you, the first one of which is titled, Noah's Lesbian Daughter is Left Behind the Night of the Flood. The party rushed downstairs, a staccato of heels in an echo chamber stairwell. I stepped wrong, fell like hard rain, and almost toothed the linoleum. A woman grabbed my wrist before I could spill my drink, my pulse pounding in her hands. I tore off my heels, so much easier to walk, barefoot, and it didn't matter anyway. We were submerged up to our waists by the time we overflowed onto the street, bobbing faces, bright and blurred poreless in the deluge. We waded past strip clubs and deli counters, jumped off city cop cars into the dark water, the giant puddle of America. Eventually, I lost my drink and opened my mouth to the downpour, but the clouds had lifted. Me in my tight dress doing laps in town center, sudden quiet and sloshing water. Slowly, the party partnered off, climbed up fire escapes, and wrung out the rain, drifted 2 by 2, down alleys and into fountains. I listened for the woman who saved me, the pulse of her palms, but she'd been swept away. I listened for a rainbow of doves' wet wing beat, but the night was emptied out. And the next one is called The Sleepover. Snow settles heavy on the porch awning until it bends, spills down to cover the daffodils that woke too early in March. In the basement, the girls turn restless in their sleeping bags. It's too quiet. They beg Rose to sing. Her voice staggers out on shaky legs, the water dance of loons, the nightjar call, good Lord, deliver us. The girls applaud. It's too dark to see if Rose blushes. The basement door opens, throws down a sliver of yellow light. Rose climbs the stairs so quickly, it's hard to tell if her feet touch the steps. The door shuts. The basement quiets again. Each girl shifts her eyes, pretends not to hear the muffled tones upstairs, imagines away the sound of a slap. When Rose returns to the basement, it's too dark to see her streaming tears. The snow covers the night. Sleep, it says. The girls roll over, bury their faces in blankets, let whatever is said next be absorbed by night and fabric. Thank you.
And now I'd like to welcome Tamiya Williams.
Hi there. I'll be reading 3 prose pieces. The first one is titled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 mile. In adulthood, she still feared thunderstorms. She worried about neon shards rupturing a tree, setting a forest ablaze, burning what little she claimed. She stewed over tornadoes too, those racing inescapable pits. In high school, she heard that lightning doesn't touch even ground. It only struck the dissimilar. Later, she learned that wasn't guaranteed. Nothing is perfectly calm and flat. Even if it was, lightning could still attack. Her teachers offered other reassurances. A tornado sounds like a freight train. If you don't hear that, you're fine. But she didn't know what a freight train sounded like. Count the seconds between lightning and thunder. It'll let you know how far away the eye is. But knowing the disaster looms overhead doesn't lighten its rampage. Still, she held her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 mile. In middle school, her mom said that each lightning strike was God blinking. She wondered why he did it if it could kill. Her mother said that thunder was him laughing. She wondered why he laughed, knowing it was scary. Her mother told her that that was normal. Fearing thunderstorms? No, living in fear. That doesn't matter, though. After all, heaven awaits after death. But what does heaven look like? Something good. Just pray and have faith. So she did, lived and breathed and prayed in 5-second intervals. And my next one is your erasure is consistent. Swallowing birth certificates, unhinging the jaws for morsels of Moors, choking on percents, those dot heads and feet slashed through, before coughing them down. Small gagging, the rising of minuscule bile, chortled back down. In the name of the Bible, cradling urns like newborns for dessert, devouring feathers as teepees line the throat, spitting out bones into fields to work and breed, choosing the meat and souls of others othered at your own heed. Conquering, chewing, beating, biting, destroying, drinking, slashing, slurping, and still the meal hasn't finished yet. You insist on consuming us all. Learn to starve by choice. And my last one is questions and exclamations by the average Black girl, probably in order, mostly in 2020. I really want to have kids one day, but I don't want them to become hashtags. I fantasize about being wild for a day, not checking the back seat or jumping from the crease under cars. Dear Twitter, you're an icon for consistent flagging. I hope my younger cousins are avoiding you right now, though. They fear Black joy the most. I'm afraid to turn off my phone. What if there's a break-in, an assault, and I need to call the fire department? Though I've had this fear for years. Do I need a gun? Should I get a body cam? I don't want to look at my own Twitter feed, but here I am screenshotting to document something. Google John Henryism, pro bono. Y'all kept track of which companies help workers at the beginning of COVID. Now keep track of which mayors are using curfew traps and which reps are being sprayed with protesters. Anger is tiring, but I fear the day I become desensitized. I'm not tired. I'm not tired. I'm not tired. How can I afford to be tired? Only the smell of burning olive branches cuts now. We are not our ancestors. We will fuck you up. Thank you.
You're all so good. You're all so great. Yeah, really. I want to read all of your names first. Mackenzie Brady, Nicole Hatfield, Rebecca Kanosky, Justin Thomas Nash, Megan Walsh, Tamiya Williams. And now, deep breath. The 2021 Sophie Kerr Prize. Is Justin Nash.
Go for it. Thank you. There aren't words. We were all told to prepare something, and I did the thing that you do when you're told to prepare something, where you make the list of things that are important to you and the people that you want to thank, and then you come up here and you give some ravishing, weepy speech about all of those things that you want to recognize and all of the people you want to thank. And I came up with a list of nearly 80 people, friends, colleagues, teachers, mentors, the people to whom I hold myself accountable and to whom I aspire. but to thank all of those people in the manner that they deserve to be thanked would have us here until dawn, and I don't think that we have that time exactly. But the other reason that I'm not doing that, despite it burning a hole in my pocket, is because I can't imagine this moment being about anything other than the other 5 people here on the stage behind me. I'm gonna cry. But I could not have imagined a better cohort, and you 5 are 5 of my absolute best friends, who are the best writers and editors and journalists and artists who I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. And I don't know, I want to ask you up here, and I think we're allowed to do that. So come on, get out of your seats. Yes, I'll come up here. Yeah. I think it's one of the great shames of any prize like this that only one person can win it. And I just refuse to let this moment be about anything other than all of us all at once. So thank you all. That's it.
Well, I can't top that. So, and Justin, you've truly distinguished yourself, and I think in part by what we've just seen there, because this is an incredibly talented and impressive group of students, all 6 of you. So I'm very excited that we can celebrate all of you tonight. And I think you all are well on your way toward the fulfillment of that promise that Sophie Kerr, back in 1942, started to think about and sort of set you on that path. If it happens someday in the future, you return to Washington College having sold lots of books, we will certainly be happy to take and start a new endowment. But more importantly, we're excited to hear from all of you in the coming days and weeks and years, and to see what your next chapter will be. So get to work. And good night and best wishes to all. Thanks for joining us.